Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Majar Gavelazi, and coming up in today's newscast. With only days remaining to form a new government, will Naftali Bennett agree to join the coalition of change? The UN Human Rights Council adopts a resolution to launch an investigation into alleged Israeli war crimes. And the first group of international tourists in over a year arrives in Israel to tour the Holy Land. In a few days, on June 2nd, the deadline to form a coalition is set to expire. And as such, Israel's party leaders are racing to try and secure a majority coalition and form a new government. The past couple of days have seen major political developments, as it seems that all eyes are on Yamina party leader Naftali Bennett, eagerly awaiting his decision on whether he will stay with the right-wing bloc or agree to join the coalition of change with Yesh Atid's Yair Lapid, which would see Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unseated after 12 years in power. With more on the latest developments, ILTV's Hannah Rifkin reporting.
New Hope leader Gideon Sa'ar rejecting on Sunday morning a proposal by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meant to lure him into a right-wing coalition. The offer for Sa'ar to serve first as Prime Minister in a 3-seat rotation, followed by Netanyahu and Yamina party leader Naftali Bennett, and with Netanyahu also agreeing that this would be his last term. Netanyahu issuing a statement on Twitter calling on Gideon Sa'ar and Naftali Bennett to come in for an urgent meeting to secure a right-wing coalition immediately.
אנחנו נמצאים ברגע גורלי לביטחונה, אופייה ועתידה של מדינת ישראל. ברגע גורלי כזה שמים בצד כל שיקול אישי ונוקטים צעדים מרחיקי לכת, חסרי תקדים אפילו. זה מה שכל ראשי סיעות הימין ואני עשינו עכשיו. חתמנו על הצעה מרחיקת לכת לגדעון סער ונפתלי בנט. הצעה שתמנע הקמת ממשלת שמאל מסוכנת ותבטיח הקמה של ממשלת ימין חזקה ויציבה לשנים רבות שתדאג לכל אזרחי ישראל.
However, Sa'ar taking to Twitter Sunday morning, writing, "Our position and commitment was and remains to change the Netanyahu regime. We will continue to act accordingly. Warm recommendation for the next few days, ignore spins." Netanyahu is doing everything he can to secure a right-wing coalition. On Saturday night, Israeli media reporting that Yamina's Naftali Bennett was set to make a decision on whether he would join Yesh Atid's Yair Lapid in forming a coalition of change, ousting Prime Minister Netanyahu after 12 years in power. This under the agreement that Bennett would serve as Prime Minister first in a rotation with Lapid. This under the agreement that Bennett would serve as Prime Minister first in a rotation with Lapid. The government of change would be a coalition comprised of right-wing Yamina, New Hope, and Avigdor Lieberman's party Yisrael Beitenu, alongside centrist Yesh Atid and left-wing Labor and Meretz parties. This supported from the outside by Arab party Ra'am. Analysts saying that Bennett would prefer to maintain a right-wing coalition, but if unable to, would likely join the government of change to avoid fifth elections. As such, Bennett even scheduling a Yamina faction meeting to vote on joining the coalition of change, but postponed the meeting to see if there would be any new developments with Gideon Sa'ar joining the right-wing coalition. Bennett needs 6 out of 7 votes in favor, and any MKs who oppose the vote will be asked to resign for a candidate who would vote in favor. And so now all eyes remain on Naftali Bennett to see whether he will agree to join the government of change, unseating Netanyahu and becoming the next prime minister, or whether the country will head towards fifth elections, or perhaps another alternative that will present itself in the coming days.
With just days until the mandate to form a coalition expires, both sides are racing to form a majority coalition, making unprecedented offers and sacrifices. There are a lot of political developments happening very quickly. So, will Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu be able to form a right-wing coalition and stay in power? Or will he be replaced by Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett after an unprecedented 12 years as Israel's Prime Minister? Joining me to discuss is former member of Knesset for the Yesh Atid party, Rabbi Dov Lippman, and Emil Whiteman, head of the Libertarian Caucus in the Likud. Welcome. So let's start off with the obvious question. People are probably wondering about this the most. Will Netanyahu be unseated? What's it looking like at this point? Rabbi Lippman, let's start with you.
there's no doubt that at this moment, as we're speaking, it looks like that's about to happen. Naftali Bennett has made the decision. He's met with his faction to join with this alternative government, this unity government, which actually spans from right wing to left wing. Netanyahu has spent the day making all kinds of last minute efforts to try to woo the Gidon Sa'ar, the New Hope Party, over. But at this point, Sa'ar has stood his ground, kept to his promise. The goal is to unseat Netanyahu. And as we stand right now, that appears to be happening.
And Amir, Sa'ar has said that he won't sit with Netanyahu. Is he really serious about this? Is he really willing to give up his chance at being prime minister?
Well, it appears, I don't know, but it seems so. Unfortunately, it seems that personal hatred and desire of vengeance is what is leading him in his decisions. I think that he has made a decision that it really doesn't matter what the government does. The only thing that matters is to get rid of Netanyahu as prime minister. And that is the one and only relevant, political goal that he's pursuing. So therefore, he sees no problem, by the way, reneging on all his other promises, including sitting with Lapid, including sitting with the extreme left wing, the Labour Party and the Meretz Party, including having a minority government which is being supported by the Ram party, the Arab party, which is really the Muslim Brotherhood party. So this is not a problem, right? It's obvious that a government like that, in the best of cases, is not going to be able to pursue any sort of constructive policies. The only thing that is of interest to him is to get rid of Netanyahu. So unfortunately, that's where this country has come to, this policy, the Knesset, the only thing that they are interested in is whether to keep Netanyahu, whether to keep rid of Netanyahu. It's frankly very, very sad that Israeli politics.
Rabbi Lippman, how did we get to this point where you have all these politicians on the right, Naftali Bennett, Gidon Sa'ar, who are simply unwilling to sit with Netanyahu to the point where they're willing to go with a more left-wing government?
Well, that's why I have to disagree with my colleague Amir and say this is not personal hatred. These are people who sat in the room and worked closest to him, Gidon Sa'ar and Zev Elkin and Yoaz Hendel. This is not hatred. These are people who have seen a prime minister who they respected and supported and worked with, who they now feel is damaging the country and making decisions that is not the best thing for the country. So they're actually sacrificing significantly politically in order to make this happen. And to hear people on Likud saying, oh my goodness, he's sitting with Ram, this militant radical Islamic party, when Netanyahu himself was willing to do so for the sake of being prime minister.
We said no. We said no.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's time for Likud to wake up and to realize there's an offer on the table right now for Likud to lead the country. Just have someone else other than Netanyahu be prime minister, and that will happen. So to suggest that these people who worked with him is out of vengeance or personal hatred, I'm sorry, that's just political spin and really not intellectually honest.
Well, I would say two things. First of all, I personally have no problem with getting rid of Netanyahu. I personally think he should be stepping aside, just to be clear and on record. I think indeed he's got too much opposition. I think at some point, politicians need to know how to step down. Unfortunately, Netanyahu missed the majority by a little bit, but he should be stepping down. This I agree with the former Knesset member Lippman. Having said that, the main thing that stands between the right-wing government and the reality is simply that Bennett and Gidon Sa'ar are frustrated. The reality is that they are not in the league of Netanyahu. They're very, very, very far away from them. They are third-rate politicians with very little public support, 6-7 mandates. Less than 5% support for Gidon Sa'ar, less than 6% support for Bennett. They've been trying times and times again, and they have been repudiated massively by the public. And Gidon Sa'ar was trounced in the primaries in the Likud by Netanyahu. He was utterly rejected by the public just 2 months ago. But the reality is that these people are fed up with playing second fiddles. And they want Netanyahu out of the game. That's really what interests them.
All right, Amir, I want to.
What I'm saying is,
Amir, I want to interject. I just want to ask, since we're almost out of time, I just want to ask, what would a Bennett-Lapid government even look like? Because you have right wing on the one side and left wing on the other side with Arab party support. Is this something that is realistic? Will a coalition like this even be able to last?
So first of all, just to make a point, Netanyahu offered these third-rate politicians, Bennett and Saar, to be prime minister.
Very sad. He should go just on that.
First of all. Second of all, this government will be a government that won't do anything radical on security issues. They'll try to manage the country on a health level, on economic level, reunify the country. They will be tested. If there are security issues, there will be tests, and it could fall apart over that. But it can manage a country on a day-to-day level with everyone agreeing to put the extreme right wing and extreme left wing aside, and they have pretty even split of right, center, and left. So it absolutely can work, but it will be tested for sure, and we'll see how long it can last for.
And what will happen to the right-wing bloc? What will happen to Netanyahu if he's replaced? Is this the end of his political career, or do you see him bouncing back?
First of all, nobody knows. That's the reality. Netanyahu is very, very strong. He remains very popular. And funnily enough, he actually may get some more support because some of the supporters of Bennett and Saar are very disappointed with their stance. So it's quite likely, actually, there will be a bounce. Now, whether that means that he will be able to come back to power within the foreseeable future is a different story, because a government like this left-wing government, which is about to be created, is only being kept together by hatred, a personal hatred against Netanyahu. So long as Netanyahu is here, they have a reason to stay together. Whereas once actually the Likud chooses a new head, it will be much more difficult for them. And I don't think that Bennett will renounce so easily on being prime minister. So my take is that they actually will be very happy to have Netanyahu carry on as the head of the opposition, which gives them a reason to stay together and have this sharpness government, this government made out of very, very different people who in the best of cases are not going to do anything productive. That's in the best of cases. I'm personally very fearful of very bad things because when politicians are in power but they don't have public support, they tend to do extreme stuff to change their political position. And that is actually very dangerous. So I would be very happy to share in the optimism of Rabbi Lippman and Bezrat Hashem, please God, I hope he's right. But
all right, well, Amil,
speaking,
unfortunately, that is all the time we have. So Rabbi Dov Lippman, Amil Whiteman, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Now, moving on, an emboldened Iran, seen by many as one of the greatest threats to Israel, continuing its aggressive rhetoric and actions. Iran's Quds Force commander, Brigadier General Ismail Ghani, made remarks over the weekend calling on Israelis to go back to Europe and America, saying that the Palestinians were ready to take back control of the occupied lands.
توصیه می‌کنیم به همه صهیونیست‌ها قبل از اونی که خانه‌هایی که در اروپا و امریکا و جاهای دیگه فروختین و اومدین توی سرزمین گرانتر از امروز بشود برگردین و خونه‌هاتون رو بخرین و بازسازی کنین.
The Quds Force commander also praised Hamas for the recent conflict, seemingly boasting of their improved capabilities since the previous rounds of fighting.
در این جنگ اثبات شد که فلسطین قهرمان انشاءالله باید در فکر اداره کل فلسطین باشد و رژیم صهیونیستی باید از الان به فکر ترک کردن این سرزمین باشد.
These remarks were made after last week Director General of the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, confirmed that the Islamic Ayatollah regime is enriching uranium to levels of 60% purity and higher, or in other words, to nearly weapons-grade uranium, and expressing severe reservations about the ability to return to the nuclear deal. While the May 21st Egyptian brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is holding, major efforts are underway to secure a long-term ceasefire agreement. As such, Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi arrived in Egypt on Sunday, invited by his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the ceasefire as well as bilateral ties between the two countries. This is a significant invitation as it marks the first high-level public visit to Egypt by an Israeli official in over a decade. Yet, despite the recent calm, the backlash from the latest round of fighting continues, as the United Nations Human Rights Council voted on Thursday to launch an international investigation into crimes committed during the 11-day conflict. ILTV's Hannah Rifkin with the report.
By a vote of 24 states in favor, 9 against, and 14 abstentions, the UN Human Rights Council adopting a resolution on Thursday, presented by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Palestinian delegation to the United Nations, to launch an investigation into crimes committed during the recent conflict between Israel and terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. The resolution seeks to launch an investigation into alleged war crimes of the 11-day conflict, though has no end date for the investigation.
As to the resolution before us, Germany holds strong reservations. The Human Rights Council has an important role dealing with acute crisis and related human rights violations. The present resolution, however, does not address the recent escalation and omits any context. Instead, it would mandate a commission of inquiry that stretches indefinitely into the future and the past.
Ahead of the vote, permanent representative of Israel to the UN in Geneva, Ambassador Meirav Elon Shachar, called on the member states to condemn Hamas and ask them what they would do if rockets were launched on their cities.
Each one of these rockets constitute a war crime. Each one of these rockets constitute a tragedy. I want to ask member states participating in today's session, what would you do if rockets were fired at Dublin, Paris, or Madrid? How would you respond if terrorists attacked Beijing, Islamabad, or Moscow?
As such, the Hamas terrorist organization welcomed the resolution, while Israel was quick to reject it, saying the country would not cooperate with the probe.
The resolution does not mention Hamas, does not mention the more than 4,400 rockets that were launched at Israeli civilians indiscriminately. Judging from past experience, the Commission of Inquiry will not look into Hamas war crimes. Therefore, Israel will not cooperate with such an investigation. We are committed to the security of our citizens and will continue to protect our population while upholding our obligations under international law.
Now in other news, some good news. For the first time in over a year, the first group of foreign tourists arrived in Israel last week and has been touring the country. This as Israel has seen a drastic drop in coronavirus cases and as the country prepares to drop many coronavirus restrictions.
A group of 12 Christian pilgrims studying theology at the Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, became the first group of tourists to arrive in Israel in over a year. The group landing at Israel's Ben Gurion Airport on Thursday afternoon and greeted by Israeli Minister of Tourism, Orit Farkasha-Cohen.
After over a year, since March 2020, Israel has closed its skies to tourism. And today I was very excited to welcome the first group of vaccinated tourists to come to Israel after the COVID-19. Israel is COVID-19 free. It is world leading in the rate of its vaccination. Everything is open here, from restaurants to hotels to resorts to holy places and so on. And we have a lot to offer.
The group, being led by Pastor Tom Zelt of the Prince of Peace Church, is planning to visit Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Christian sites around the country.
It's wonderful to be back in Israel, in the land in which God has done so much for us. It's great to have students here to be able to study and to tour, to see these wonderful places. So we're glad it opened up. Thanks for working so hard to be so safe for us, and we're very grateful to be here.
Israel closed its borders to foreign tourists when the coronavirus pandemic began in March 2020. And now, since the majority of the country's population is vaccinated and the coronavirus cases have drastically dropped, the government launching a new pilot program allowing small groups of vaccinated tourists to enter the country. Under the pilot, the tourism ministry saying it expects around 20 groups to arrive, including from the United States, Germany, and the UK. Despite opening its borders, Israeli authorities still remain very wary of introducing new variants into the country. And as such, all tourists entering must show a negative corona test before flying and take another test upon arriving. The group also needs to take serological tests at their hotel to prove they have COVID-19 antibodies and are required to remain in quarantine until the results return, usually a matter of a few hours, before they're able to enjoy the sights here in Israel.
Now, it's said that it takes 7 years of practice to become fluent in a language. But what if you're taking a trip and only need enough to get around on a basic level? Well, perhaps a shorter crash course is what you need. And if so, then when you come to Israel, Ulpan Ol's got you covered. Yoel and Oli Ganol of Ulpan Ol returning to the studio with details about their newest course, Flavor of Israel. So welcome, and let's start. Why don't you tell us about the course?
Okay. If you visit a foreign country, especially a country that most people don't speak English, have you ever visited such a country?
Many times.
Many times. Well, in my high-tech years, I've traveled a lot, and I used to come to Japan and Korea, and at that time, most people did not speak English. So just saying, in Japanese, arigato gozaimashite, which means thank you, people already melted. Or when I and Orly were in Greece, for instance, just learning how to say good morning or good evening, like kalimera or kalinichta or evcharisto, thank you, it already melted the cold barrier between you and these people. So, Orly, what do you have to say about it?
Okay, so what we did is we designed a very, very experiential course, which involves videos, audio, and lots of very, very, very high-tech techniques that brings our student to a fluent speech. In addition to that, during the years, we added to that different elements like touring in Israel and going to coffee shops. These were elements that people could add to their course.
As an option.
As an option. We saw a huge difference between people who took the indoor courses only or people who involved the outdoor activities. So what we did with the Flavor Israel, which is our new course, is to combine those two into a short session in the morning that you can study with us and really get results that are stunning within 5 days or 10 days.
So, I mean, in what situations is it worth to take such a short sort of crash course, right, in a language learning? I mean, what if you're just traveling to a country for a week or so?
Right. So exactly because of that, we decided to do these courses, to create those courses. We believe that if you experience a country in 5 days and you are using the language, the experience is totally different, as Yoel explained.
So I remember only Pamela and Sarah that came for our previous course. So there were two friends, and Pamela took just the indoor course for 5 days, and the other girl took the integrated course with the outdoor option, and the difference was tremendous. The outdoor experience gave the other students so much more confidence to come and speak to Israelis, read the signs and everything. She was thrilled.
Actually, she said that her trip to Israel was so much more meaningful than a regular trip, visiting, sightseeing, and so on.
It's a totally new dimension, new level of experiencing the country.
Now, I understand that you're offering a special deal on this course, so can you tell us about that?
Yes. Actually, what happened during the operation, the Guardian of the Walls, many of our students wrote to us trying to see how they could support us and even telling us, well, we want to pay for future courses. So we really wanted to reciprocate with them. And what we did is we created like an open ticket course where people can pay in advance without knowing yet that they would come to Israel. And it will be open, let's say, for a year. And people can utilize this option at a very discounted price right now. Right. And when they decide to come, they can tell us like a month in advance, and we'll reserve for them the spot. And knowing that these are only 5-day or 10-day courses can make their life much easier. But in the meanwhile, we invite our viewers to go onto our page, ulpanor.com, our homepage, and there's a special section where they can get for free our virtual tour ebook of Jerusalem. And doing that, they can also be on our list, and they'll get all our future announcements about this specific, the Flavor Israel course.
All right, well, sounds like a very exciting and innovative way to experience Israel. Yoel and Oli, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Hannah Rifkin.
Hey, Lidar. So we're starting off the week with clear skies, lows in the 60s in Fahrenheit this evening or in the teens, and 20s in Celsius. Then tomorrow, make sure your ACs are working because we're in for a hot day. Highs will be mostly in the 90s and 100s or upper 30s in Celsius.
All right, well, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.25 shekels to the American dollar and 2.69 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Ladar Gervais-Lazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching. Bennett.